So we're going to talk about different types of data. And so we want to see if we can use a blind date style technique for learning about types of data. So what we're going to do is pretend we have a best friend and we're going to set them up on a blind date. And we're going to collect data about the person that we're setting them up on and then use that to help us learn about how to categorize the type of data that we've collected. So let's say we have a friend, we're going to set them up with someone, and they're asking us a bunch of questions about that person before they're willing to go on a blind date. Now, if this were a face-to-face class, I normally would ask everybody to contribute things that would matter to you when going on a date. But since I can't hear you, I'm going to pretend these are the things that you said. So what might be some things you might want to know about someone before you go on a blind date with them? Perhaps it was important for you to know what their major was, and this person is a psychology major. Maybe it was important for you to know that they're a college freshman. Maybe you wanted to know how tall they were, and I'm going to tell you they're 5'2". Oh, maybe it would be kind of shallow if you wanted to know what dress size they were or what clothing size they were, but let's say they were a size 10. Maybe it mattered to you what hair color they had, and I'm going to tell you they were a brunette. Maybe it's important for you to know that they're a cat person and they have 3 cats. And maybe you wanted to know what their IQ was. And I'd say, okay, well, their IQ is 125. So these might be some things that you might want to know about your blind date before going. So now that we have all of these variables, let's see if we can use these to help us learn about how to categorize them. So we have 2 ways we are describing this person. One of the types of variables is qualitative variables. And these are things that are really qualitative or qualities about the person. And that's in contrast to quantitative variables, which are really quantities about the person. So qualitative variables are qualities about the person. In other words, these would be words that would classify them. So of the list we had on the previous page, it would be things like they're a college freshman, a psychology major, they have brunette or brown hair. See, these are qualities about the person. Quantitative variables, these would be anything that would come to us as numbers. So the fact that they're 5'2", they have 3 cats, not 0 cats. They have, my dog's barking in the background, just ignore that. They wear a size dress that's a size 10 dress, that's a number. And they have an IQ of 125. So already we can see that of all the data that we've collected about this person, we can separate them into qualities or quantities. But then we're going to even dig deeper than that. So let's split these qualities and quantities into even more levels. So among the qualitative variables, we're going to start with variables that are called nominal variables. The formal definition is mutually exclusive and exhaustive categories differing in some qualitative aspect. I think that's a very intimidating definition, so let me break it down for you. So mutually exclusive means that you can only be one thing or another. So for example, you can't be a college freshman and a college junior at the same time. It doesn't work that way, right? So mutually exclusive means you can only be one thing or another. Exhaustive means that the list is including everything. So if I ask what hair color this person was, then the possible answers are every possible hair color available, including purple and pink and all that kind of thing. And a way to make an exhaustive list is just to add an other category. But this means that the answers that we get will include every possible outcome. We're not going to leave it hanging where there was something that was the response that we couldn't collect. So these responses on nominal variables are different from each other. Being a brunette is different than being a blonde, and so they're differing in some qualitative aspect. So in our example, nominal variables were brunette, they were a psych major. Now I know you could be a double major, but that would be classified as something else as a double major. But if you're a psych major, then you're not a bio major unless you're doing psych and bio, right? So some other common nominal variables would be gender, ethnic group, religion. So again, I want to point out that these are words, right? So when I ask somebody what is their religion, they're not going to say number 2, right? It's going to be a word that's going to be different from another word response that someone could have for their religion. Now let's talk about the next level qualitative variables. We could have qualitative variables that are ordinal. And if you look at ordinal, it kind of looks like the word order. So ordinal variables have all the same properties of the nominal scale, but now they've added something of order or rank. So this means that ordinal variables are mutually exclusive and exhaustive, which means that you can only be one thing or another. You can't be multiple things. You can't be a brunette and a blonde. It's exhaustive, where all of our responses are, everything is possible. But also now these responses that differ in a qualitative aspect can be put in order. So an example we had from our blind date was, oops, I'm sorry, I made the definition of rank and forgot. So this additional element of rank means that the observations can be put in order of magnitude. So we can go from smallest to biggest or some kind of order. We didn't have that when it was nominal. There's no best religion and then worst religion. There's not an ethnic group that needs to go first and an ethnic group that needs to go last. You could put them in order of alphabetical order. You could put them in order of how common they are. But when it's an ordinal scale, it's defined. The order is defined. So for our example, college freshman would be an example of ordinal variable. So a college freshman comes before a college junior, right? And so we have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That's a very specific order. You can't go from senior down to freshman. You move in this progressive order. So that means that if you're a freshman, you're not also a sophomore. It means that the list includes every possible way of being, but now this list includes things that have rank to them. So in addition to our dating example, we have some other common examples, which would include military rank, right? We have a general, and we have cadets, and they're in different places. We have Olympic medals, right? Bronze, silver, gold. Those are examples of words that have order implied, and that order is important. So these are our two types of qualitative variables. Nominal, which are just words, but they don't have any order implied. And then we have ordinal, which are also words, but now they have an order implied. That helps us move into the next grouping, and that's quantitative variables. So now let's talk about our two types of quantitative variables. So the first one's called interval. And the definition of an interval is that it has all the same properties of an ordinal scale. So you notice the pattern here. Ordinal scale had all the same properties of nominal, which means it's mutually exclusive and exhaustive. And then ordinal said mutually exclusive and exhaustive and has order. Now interval says it's mutually exclusive and exhaustive and has order. And now it has this additional property that the distance between each of the measures is equal. And by the way, that's the kind of the definition of a number. A number is that there are incremental increases and the distance between those increments is the same. So I've just defined a number for you. So quantitative variables moves into interval, and interval is a number. So now we have the equal distance piece. So ordinal added that there was order. Now we know that in order they are equally distant. You might want to think back about ordinal when we're talking about first, second, and third place, or gold, silver, bronze, right? That doesn't really suggest that the distance between the silver medalist and the gold medalist is the same as the silver medalist and the bronze medalist, right? There could be a 2-hour difference between running the race for the bronze and the silver medalist, and only a 10-minute difference between the silver and gold. They implied order, but not distance, whereas interval, the distance between the categories now matters. So an example that we gave in our dating example would be IQ and dress size, right? So going up 10 IQ points is the same if you had started at 120 as it would be if you started at 140, right? Dress size, if you go from a size 10 to a 12, it's the same as if you incrementally increase from a 12 to a 14. So these are examples of interval variables that are quantitative. Now I'm going to ask you to kind of trust me for a minute while we move on to the next layer, because sometimes students get confused about the difference between this one and the next one, and I kind of have to explain the next one before I can clarify this one. So the next level is other examples would be temperature, military time. Well, I'll come back to this one. So another example would be, another level of quantitative variables, and this is the last variable, it's ratio data. So ratio data have all the same properties of the interval scale, which means it's mutually exclusive and exhaustive, has order, has equal distance, and now has one additional property, which means that it has an absolute 0 point. In other words, now when we have a 0, it means that you have nothingness. It's kind of like this idea that now 0 stands for nothing. It stands for meaning I have nothing of that item. That's different than in interval data. So what I say now is we have a meaningful 0. So if I ask you how many cats do you have and you say I have 0 cats, that means that you have nothingness of the cat ownership, right? You have no cats. That's different than if we were going to ask you an interval question. If I said, what dress size are you? And you said, I'm a dress size 0. That actually is a dress size 0. It doesn't mean there's no dress on the hanger. It means it's just the tiniest size dress. It's a placeholder for a small size dress. So the 0 in the interval variables is kind of a placeholder for the smallest, or maybe it doesn't even have to be the smallest, but it's for a placeholder for the scale. So you notice I have temperature up in interval. That's because if I say, what's the temperature outside, and you say 0 degrees Celsius, does that mean there's no temperature outside? It is impossible for there to be no temperature. There clearly is a temperature, it's just very, very cold. And 0 degrees Celsius is a placeholder for just where they chose to start the scale. Same with military time. If I say, hey, what time is it in military? Say, 100 hours. Doesn't mean that suddenly time does not exist. It just means that this is a placeholder for this particular point in time. So that means that in the interval variables, the 0 is just a placeholder. Whereas in ratio, we're now dealing with data where the 0 means I don't have anything of that. So in our example, cats and height would both be ratio. So how many cats you have? It's possible to have 0 cats. It's possible to have 0 height. Right? I know it feels like you can't have 0 height, but trust me, and we'll address that on the next slide. If I had asked other questions, I could say, how long is it? How much does it weigh? How many dollars do you have in your pocket? Almost all the data that we'll be dealing with are ratio, that are quantitative, are ratio. There are very few interval variables or interval data. The few examples that we have, I have listed really here. So dress size is a very common one. Temperature, and you notice I put IQ, and that's actually because you can't have a 0 IQ. The scale doesn't even let you start at 0. Just by breathing, you've moved to 10. So that's great. Yay, you're at least at 10. So the interval variables, there's really just those handful. I think also maybe shoe size for tiny babies. They have a size 0 for newborns. But other than that, there are really very few examples of interval data. Whereas all other numbers, if you think it's a number, it's likely ratio, because most things, if I say you have 0 of it, then that really is why you would use 0. It means I have none of that item. So interval, 0 is a placeholder. Ratio, 0 implies I have nothing of that. I have none. So now I just want to recap a little bit where students usually have questions on this. So if we were in a face-to-face class, this is where usually hands shoot up and people start asking some questions. So usually I get the question, can age really be ratio data? Because people feel like you have to have unaged. Zero can't be, you can't have 0 in your age. But I would argue 0 can be ratio because it all just depends on your scale. So if I said, how old are you? And let's say you're not even a year old yet, then you would be 0 years old, and that's okay, because then I should have maybe asked, how many months old were you? Well, let's say you aren't even a month old yet, so 0 months would be your answer. But then if I really wanted to know, then I should have asked how many weeks, how many minutes, how many seconds. So you see, if you are only 6 months old, and I ask you in years, how old are you, then it's appropriate to say, I'm 0 years old. You can have 0 as your response. So even though you feel like you have to have an age, or you have to have a height, or you have to have a weight, depending on my scale, a 0 is an appropriate, sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm saying inappropriate. 0 is an appropriate response because that's how I'm measuring it. So most numbers are ratio data because when you say 0, it means I don't have any of that thing that you're asking me about. So what is the most common type of quantitative data? That's ratio. If you're not sure, if I give you a number and you know it's an absolute number, it's really a number, and you're not sure whether it's interval or ratio, likely it is ratio, because the very few examples we have of interval are IQ, dress size, shoe size, and temperature. Otherwise, if it's a number, then it's going to be ratio. So what we've just done is covered all the different types of data. We have quantitative and qualitative, and of the two qualitative, we had nominal and ordinal, and then of the two quantitative, we had interval and ratio, and those four make up all the type of data we're going to analyze in this class.